Hi everyone, it's Mr. Sinti, and this is part two of a nutrition series that I'm creating. Now, I've mentioned before that nutrition is such an important topic. It's something that we all should really pay attention to in terms of our own health and well being, but it's also important for a lot of other reasons. In other words, like um, if you're a parent and you're trying to provide proper food for your children, and it's it's something that if you can get into the right routine and get a basic understanding, it's going to really enhance the quality of your life and really the longevity as well. And so what I hope to do in these video series is discuss a little bit about some of the macromolecules involved in nutrition. And in this particular segment, I'm going to look at lipids and proteins in particular. And so let's get into that conversation. So lipids are something, it, it that it's a macromolecule and it has a bad connotation. And so, maybe rightly so. Maybe maybe it deserves a bad reputation because, as you may know, triglycerides, which is what this is right here. It's a glycerol and attached three fatty acids. This triglyceride, which is commonly known as fat, because it's a solid at room temperature, is commonly found and it is associated with skeletal muscle. And so, as you can see here, is a steak, and all of this white material is fat. And so, this is a triglyceride right here. That is a triglyceride. And so this is not so good to have in your diet. There's an association between this and cardiovascular disease and strokes, heart attack. These are not good. Here's the thing, though. Fat in and of itself, this molecule is stored in this tissue called adipose tissue. And so, all things being equal, in our own body, this is essential. We need this as a source of energy. It helps to cushion us. It surrounds our organs and it helps to insulate us and keep us warm. And so, what I'm saying is, just keep a moderate perspective in all these matters. We should be eating less saturated fats. And when I say saturated fat, I'm meaning the triglyceride with single bonds. It's the saturated fats that tend to be solid at room temperature. Okay, so, and you're like, well, I cut off the fat, so I'm good. I'm good to go because I really think that the meat is delicious and it's providing a good source of protein. Yes, it is delicious. It is providing a good source of protein, but you can't cut it out completely. Even if you think you can, it's sort of marbled, as you can see here in this steak. It's throughout, and if you ever had an opportunity to look at skeletal muscle under the microscope, you'll know that the adipose tissue and the skeletal muscle are right next to each other, and so you really can't cut it out. And you're like, well, such a inconvenience. Well, in fact, it's very convenient from a muscle perspective. This is where you would want to store your triglycerides because when the muscle itself is contracting, it's using a lot of energy. And so the muscle cell stores the polysaccharide glycogen, but when those glycogen stores are used up, you've got to draw upon the adipose tissue. And what a great location is to put the adipose tissue right next to the skeletal muscle. And so it all makes sense. It's just we have to eat less of it. And so again, here's the structure of a glycerol. And you're like, well, wait a minute, there's two fatty acids. Where's the third? Well, this has a phosphate group. This is a phospholipid. Sure, you might recall it as a member of the cell membrane. And so phospholipids make up lipids, triglycerides make up lipids, and cholesterol makes up lipids. Now, cholesterol, it doesn't look like the others. It doesn't have a glycerol and fatty acids like this, but rather it has this four-ring carbon structure and it has some functional groups coming off of it. And so cholesterol is also essential. You need it. Again, it has a bad reputation. It's found in the cell membrane. It helps to maintain fluidity in the cell membrane. It's rather important. But again, our modern diet tends to be very, very high in cholesterol. And study after study can correlate the relationship with a high cholesterol diet, high concentration of cholesterol in the diet, with troubles with cardiovascular disease and stroke. So really to be avoided. And so where is it found? It's found in foods of animal origin. And so cholesterol is such an important deal. I'm going to sort of take a moment over here and show you something I found on the internet. And so I typed into a search top 10 foods that are highest in cholesterol. And so these are some things to sort of watch out for. And so here's the thing. Number one on the list is egg, but not egg yolk, because this is where the cholesterol is mostly found inside the egg, which is in the egg yolk. And so while the white provides a good source of protein, it's really the yolk that contains the majority of the cholesterol. And so it's oftentimes not a bad idea to sort of jettison your yolk if you're fond of eggs. And so fish eggs are a source of cholesterol. Liver is a source of cholesterol. Butter contains not only triglycerides, but also contains cholesterol. It's kind of interesting when I go through this list. I have to admit, it's like, things that I like to eat: butter, cholesterol, prawns, high in cholesterol, fast foods high in cholesterol. Again, oil packed in fish packed in oil, not a good idea. Cheeses can, sadly, because cheeses are a good source of protein and and calcium, but they do pack a little bit of cholesterol. And then again, sausages and meat in general are a high source of cholesterol, and shellfish. Again, sadly, oysters, clams, and mussels. And so, sorry to be the bearer of bad news on that. So what I'm going to say though is, these things don't necessarily need to be cut out of your diet. Now, I'm not going to be suggesting dietary advice like a nutritionist or a physician would be, especially if you've gone in and you've had a blood test and your cholesterol levels are high. Those foods need to be avoided for common sense purposes. But if your cholesterol is being managed properly and it's of a reasonable level, then maybe once in a while you can indulge in one of those treats. But some things, you can get into a pattern, and you tend to stay within that pattern. And so my advice is, if you eat healthfully, you're going to sort of, stay within that, and I wouldn't deviate too much. Once in a while, a special treat. So triglycerides can be found in both plants and animals. Now, I mentioned these saturated ones, like for example, butter, tend to be solid. These are the ones that are very dangerous health-wise. But plants have triglycerides as well, and we think of them in terms of oils, though, because they have unsaturated bonds in their fatty acids. That's kind of a organic chemistry terminology. It just means that it's an oil at room temperature. There's double bonds. So polyunsaturated means many double bonds. So you can have monounsaturated, diunsaturated, or polyunsaturated. So unsaturated fats, or unsaturated oils, if you will, since they're liquid, are usually from plant sources, right here, like sunflower, corn oil, for example. Now, we actually have a lipid requirement. There are some essential fatty acids. Here's a fatty acid. It's a long hydrocarbon with a carboxylic acid functional group. We can make a lot of these fatty acids if we're not eating them in the diet, but some of them we cannot make. We can't make some of the fatty acids. And so, like one of them, for example, just to sort of drive the point home with an example, is linoleic acid. Linoleic acid is required. And if we're not eating that, then we'll be in big trouble. And so, as it turns out, deficiencies, who would have, and I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by this, deficiencies of the fatty acids are very rare. So we tend to eat a lot of that. But just in general, this is a moment to sort of make a comment about if you're missing a nutrient that is essential, it's considered to be malnourished. Now that's different than undernourished and overnourished. Malnourished, a person can be consuming a lot of calories, A person can even be overweight and still be malnourished if they're not getting something essential like an essential vitamin or mineral or fatty acid or amino acid. It's kind of weird. So malnourished is where you're missing an essential nutrient. So that just wanted to point that out. And so here's a picture of what linoleic acid looks like. It is a acid over here. It's this fatty acid. It's a carboxylic acid here and a fatty acid. The fatty part is right here, the hydrocarbon. Now you might have heard of this term before, like omega fatty acids. You might have heard of omega-3 fatty acids, omega-6 fatty acids. What does it mean? Well, simply omega refers to, in the Greek alphabet, as the last letter, omega. And so if you start over here at the very end, that little dot right there is a carbon. And so it's 1, 2, 3 is the location of the very first double bond. So this is an omega-3. And then it's 1, 2, 3, omega-3, 1. I'll just draw it out. Maybe I won't draw it out. I will. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. So that's an omega-3. 1, 2, 3. That's an omega-3. And then notice this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's an omega-6 fatty acid. Now, I don't want to get into the depth of detail about these, but they're all very interesting, and I hope that the video, if it at the very least stimulates your inquiry, and so that you would discover more information about some of the positive effects of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids in your diet, because these are thought to be really useful. I'm going to mention one, if you don't mind. Like salmon, for example, and other fish are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, and there are studies suggesting that the omega-3s, what happens in your body is that they become part of platelet membranes. Platelets are these little cellular fragments that are produced in the bone marrow from a parent cell called a megakaryocyte. And these platelets, as you may or may not know, are little tiny blood fragments that help clot the blood when there's a trauma. Now, what can be a problem is abnormal platelet clotting can actually be detrimental, like lethal. Like if platelets start to form clots in blood vessels when there's really no threat, it can actually block up a blood vessel and then cause lack of oxygen to that particular area, stroke or a heart attack. And so, as it turns out, once these omega-3 fatty acids are incorporated, they inhibit the growth of blood clotting material in the platelets. And so, overall, that may sound bad, but it's actually good because it helps to keep the blood flow going to the brain and to the heart more thoroughly. And so it reduces heart attack and stroke, at least as far as studies are suggesting. All of this is subject to revision, and increased knowledge is always best. And so that goes for everything, really. So that was my discussion on lipids. Let's talk about proteins. Now, so much could be said about proteins. So from a nutritional perspective, this is where I'm coming. I can come strong with the biochemistry. And then, if you don't mind, briefly, I will just for a second. So a protein is a polypeptide, meaning that it's a chain of peptides. And this is what a peptide looks like. Peptide is sometimes called an amino acid. So a peptide, I'm going to write that out, peptide. And so when you have many peptides, it's a polypeptide. And so there's one connected to another one. So you can see here the bonds between them are called peptide bonds, and then this long beaded structure is a protein, and they can fold in interesting shapes and therefore have a myriad of functionality. Absolutely critical. The whole body is constructed upon these, of first importance. All of our enzymes, not every enzyme, there's some RNA that can be an enzyme, but most enzymes are proteins. Not all of our hormones, but a lot of our hormones are proteins. Antibodies, collagen, it can keep going. So protein, very, very, very important. And in a pinch, we could even use an amino acid as a source of energy, though the body prefers carbohydrates and fatty acids for energy sources. So These proteins are obviously critical, so we eat them and we break them down in our digestive system into amino acids. And then our body has this pool of amino acids, these 20 different amino acids, and then we can hook them together in our cells and make any protein we'd like to. And we eat protein and then we make our own protein. Here's the cool thing. We can actually make 12 of the 20 amino acids even if our diet doesn't include them. So we could actually construct, there's biochemical pathways that will make 12 of the 20. I find that that's pretty interesting, provided that we have a good nitrogen in our diet. But here's the thing. Some amino acids, if you're doing your math on this, there's 8. There's 8 essential amino acids. That means we have to eat those in our diet. If we don't eat those 8 essential amino acids, we will be considered malnourished. Our body would not be able to make any of those proteins that we need if we don't have those 8. So it's absolutely critical that we get those 8 amino acids. And as an infant, you still need an additional one, the 9th, called histine. And so, this is kind of cool too, that the same 8 essential amino acids are essential for most animals. How about that in terms of evolutionary relation to ancestry? So let's talk about these. Here's a list of the 20 amino acids. Here are the essential 8. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to recommend that you remember the 8, because I'm not sure I can remember the 8 so easily. And why would I if I can just look them up? So this is how you should roll as well. You should just be able to look things up, not necessarily commit everything to a memory. So what's of importance here, though, is meat contains, now in terms of protein source, meat, which is muscle, contains what is called a complete protein, meaning that the proteins, and let me just go here, make it green. So here are the amino acids. And so there's a lot in protein. And like what protein is in muscle, like actin, myosin, tropomyosin, troponin, it goes on and on. So these proteins in meat contain all of the essential amino acids, all 8 of these. And so if you were to eat meat, it's considered to be complete. It's a complete protein. You're good to go. In other words, you can eat that and your body will be sufficient in terms of its amino acid necessities because it contains all of that. Now, you're like, wow, you're promoting a steak, you're promoting meat. And I'm like, I am in terms of complete protein. But again, I mentioned just a moment ago that there's a high price to pay when you're eating meat because it contains a lot of saturated fats and cholesterol, and this is detrimental. So you're like, here's your thing. You're like, well, I want to get my protein because I know protein's really important in my diet from a nutrition perspective, and I know that it's complete. So I know that eating meat and eggs and cheese, those proteins will be complete, but you're like, oh no. But it contains a high amount of cholesterol and saturated fats. And so what am I to do? Well, let's not forget about plants. Obviously, plants have protein. How do you think that they survive? They have enzymes and they have all of these same needs that we do. So in terms of proteins. And so here's the thing though. When you're eating a plant, when you're eating a zucchini, or if you're eating corn, or you're eating some beans, all of these proteins are considered to be incomplete. You're like, what does it mean, incomplete protein? Incomplete means that plants don't provide all of the 8 amino acids. So corn doesn't have all of the 8. You can't just eat corn. You're like, well, I wasn't planning on eating just corn. I know. This is the thing. If you consume plants in combinations, like in other words, if you have corn and bean, those are considered to be complementary because the bean protein will provide some of the essential amino acids that the corn does not. What's fascinating, as I said, there's no plant that contains all the essential amino acids. Actually, there is. The soybean contains the essential amino acids, and I think this is one of the things that makes us very interested in soy protein. And so most plants are incomplete, and so they lack either one or two or three of these amino acids. And so, for example, corn lacks just lysine. And then individuals, this is the sad thing, individuals who are forced by economic necessity to obtain all of their calories from one particular source can actually show protein deficiency. This is rough. But if you start to mix and match, and it doesn't matter, like if you were to just eat rice, you'd be incomplete. If you just eat wheat, just eat potatoes. But if you were to combine them, and I really like this diagram here, and if you take corn, remember I said that it was missing lysine and isoleucine, but if you combine that with beans and other legumes, they provide these amino acids. So here's the little overlap. If you combine these two together, you'll get all 8 of the essential amino acids. And so what you'll find, if you do a little search on this, if you look up different cultures' main cuisine, like if you look at a Mexican diet or an Indian diet or an Italian diet or a French diet, you'll find that some of the more common foods that those populations are eating, what a surprise, they contain complementary plant proteins. It's pretty cool how people have figured this out. And long before we understood the biochemistry, I think people just feel better when they're eating a variety of foods, a variety of proteins. And maybe this is just a speculation, so a little speculation warning here, that perhaps this is one of the reasons why we become sick of something if we eat it often, because our body's sort of trained to know that diversity is most important when it comes to these matters. Now, how much protein does one really need in one's diet? And so it really relates to your basal metabolic rate in terms of your amount of exercise, how much your size, your weight, all of these things. But just for an average adult, just for a number to throw out, it's about 0.8 gram of protein per day per kilogram. And so I happen to throw myself out here. And so if you happen to be 200 pounds, then that translates into about 90 kilograms in terms of weight. And so we're looking at around 80 something grams of protein per day for a person like myself. Now, if you're pregnant, you're going to want to increase this. And if you're nursing, so your baby's out, you're breastfeeding, you're going to want to have a strong protein diet. And so, here's something to point out. So if you're looking to become pregnant, or if you are pregnant, or if you're nursing, what you really need to do is go in and have a consultation with a nutritionist, and that nutritionist will spell it all out in detail, and so that'll be pretty cool. So this is kind of basic information if you think about it. So again, there's some sadness when it comes to protein deficiency or this malnutrition, because this is something that, again, can be avoided if everyone was eating the proper essential amino acids. But unfortunately, there's large numbers of people who are malnourished in protein, and it's often children. And again, the poor and agriculturally poor countries of the world, and then when you find individuals that are protein deficient for a long time, again, in order to survive, individuals have to start to use their own muscle as a source just to survive. And so sometimes even providing protein, it can be too late. A person can be mentally retarded and have physical abnormalities in mental development as a result of being deprived of protein. And so what's fascinating, and a little bit more of an upbeat here, is that, because the body doesn't store amino acids very easily, like we talked about storing carbohydrates in the form of glycogen, storing fat in the form of triglycerides, you have to have these amino acids daily. So you need to have these essential amino acids every day, or else the protein synthesis would be slowed. However, there's some animals that have some really cool adaptations that get them through periods where there's a high demand on protein in their diet may be lacking a little bit. And so there are examples of penguins, for example, that actually can use some of their muscles as a source of amino acids during times of molting, for example. So I hope you enjoyed this video, which is Nutrition Part 2, and I hope you're intrigued to look at Part 3. Thanks for watching.